So now we're going to look at the spinal cord. All right. So we have this transverse cross-section of the spinal cord. All right. So before we actually look forward and address this, let's talk about some of the different parts. All right. So you have this acronym here that I always remember, SAME. There's two types of neurons that are involved in the spinal cord for this lecture: the sensory and the motor. Sensory neurons carry information towards the nervous system, central nervous system, and motor neurons carry information away from the central nervous system. Sensory neurons are the same as afferent neurons. Motor neurons are the same as efferent neurons, right? So if I make a little division here, if you remember SAME, you'll never be able to mix these two up, all right? Another thing you notice about the spinal cord, that there's these different types of matter. There's white matter and there's gray matter. All right. So the white matter is in yellow, so it's on the outer layer, whereas the gray matter is on the internal layer in the pink. All right. And so what's unique about these regions is the presence of the specific part of the neuron, right? So in the gray matter, majority of the cell types, so in pink, in the gray matter, we have majority of our somas, so cell bodies, dendrites, and some unmyelinated axons. In the white matter, which is on the outer layer, right here, right? So in the yellow, this is where we have majority of our axons, our myelinated axons. So that's why you have that white color. That white color represents the reflection off of the myelin, okay? And so to remember these more simply, whenever we talk about the actual cross-section, is for white matter, remember they use the word columns. And for the gray matter, they use the word horns. All right, so remember those two words for a second. Now, we want to look at direction of where everything is. In the back, it's either called the posterior or dorsal. In the front, it's called either anterior or ventral. Right, so if you see these words, this is what it means. So posterior dorsal is in the back, and then the anterior ventral is in the front. All right. Now, so we already have these combinations. All of these sensory neurons, enter the spinal cord through the dorsal region. All of the motor neurons are released from the spinal cord from the anterior region or in the ventral region. All right. So when we talk about actual different structures here, if you remember from before, the way nervous system works is you have some kind of stimuli that sends a signal. Signal is received. This signal is processed and then it's retransmitted. Okay. And the pathway works very simply through these different structures. All right. So in the gray matter here, these are the horns. This region in the front is called the ventral horn. So this region in the front is called the ventral horn. This region is releasing all of the motor information. In this back right here, this is called the dorsal horn. Dorsal horn receives all the information from the sensory nervous system. Okay, so the sensory neurons. All right. Now we have these projections that go outwards, right? These outward projections here are called horns. That are attached to the horns are called roots. So now we have these little projections. These are called dorsal roots and ventral roots. Okay? Dorsal roots only have sensory neurons. Ventral roots only have motor neurons. All right? And so information then converges into this bundle, which disperses out to this next structure we're going to talk about. It's called the rami. Right? So we come in here, we can see this information coming here. Now it crosses, and then you have this outward projection. Right? So these are called the rami. All right? But what's different about the dorsal root and the ventral root in terms of connection is that the dorsal region has this other ganglia called the dorsal root ganglia. So when information is being received into the central nervous system, the first region where it arrives is the dorsal root ganglia for further processing, and then it's released through the dorsal root and enters the dorsal horn for further processing. The ventral root is not connected to any ganglia. All right, that's the one difference. And then so we said here, with this connection, now we have the rami. So we have the ventral rami, and we have the dorsal rami. Oops. And what's unique about these two structures of the rami have both sensory and motor neurons, right? So we said the ventral root and the dorsal root are only selective. Dorsal root only has sensory neurons. The ventral root only has motor neurons. The rami, whether it's ventral or dorsal, have both. Okay, so you can have sensory information and motor information enter from both regions of the rami. All right, that's really important. And finally, on the lateral side too, this is called the lateral horn. And the lateral horn is responsible for a majority of autonomic function. So remember, lateral, away from the midline, okay? And so this is just a basic schematic of how information is being processed. So if there's some kind of stimuli, some guy kicks someone in the groin or something like that. So that pain gets processed and brought into the body through the dorsal and ventral rami, all that information. So where it first going is the dorsal root ganglion, where it's processing. Now it's inserted into the dorsal root, where it enters the spinal cord in the gray matter called the dorsal horn. Now further processing of information is created, and now it's released into the ventral horn for further processing. And now you have this motor response that's generated from the ventral horn, which is transmitted from the ventral root and eventually goes out to the ventral and dorsal rami. So this is just a general idea of where and how the spinal cord sends messages.